Did it! I got a somewhat well-lit screen. Hello! 大家好! If you haven't been following me on my Instagram or on my YouTube, I moved to Hong Kong and I am currently in a 21-day quarantine hotel. Dun, dun, dun. I've been in this hotel room for 16 days, and if you don't know, Hong Kong is one of the strictest parts of the world to get into right now. They are not taking immigration or COVID lightly by any means, and when I moved here I got a lot of questions from people on Instagram about my quarantine experience, my moving to Hong Kong experience, so I thought I would just do a Q&A and answer some of those questions. So I'm going to try and answer these somewhat chronologically so you guys can get a better idea of the process of moving to Hong Kong, and also just batch some questions together that I got that came up a lot, so let's dive into it. The first set of questions that came up were, what is my job and how did I move to Hong Kong? So this, I think, takes me right back to the very start of my moving to Hong Kong process. I'm not going to share with you exactly what I do because privacy, but I will tell you that it is in digital media. I didn't want to find a teaching job in Hong Kong or Asia, even though I really wanted to move here, and that would be the easiest way for me to move to Asia, would be to find a job teaching English. I was very adamant not to do that. It's just not where I want my career to be. I wanted to move to Asia in a way that would progress my career as well. To move to Asia if you don't speak the language of the country that you want to move to, and you don't want to teach English, that was one of the roadblocks I kept coming up against. But there were a few things that I did that helped me find my job currently. So first of all, I signed up to every mailing list I could find. I went on LinkedIn and I put in a search for the job areas that I wanted to get a job in and the countries that I wanted to find that job in. So I had been searching for jobs in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in mainland China, in Taiwan, and in Japan, I think. And I had put job alerts to come into my emails every single week or day even sometimes, for what new jobs were coming up in the region. I also signed up for something called Tulum, which brings you job alerts for digital media, marketing, that sort of thing, jobs that are going in those fields within Asia. What else did I do? I also got in touch with my friends who were already working in the region, and this particularly helped me out with jobs in Singapore that I was searching for. They were just kind of keeping an eye on what was coming up either in their companies or in other companies and letting me know when new jobs were coming up. It was a lot of trying to get to know what the job market was like in the region. There were recruiters who contacted me through LinkedIn, but I just didn't find them really helpful. They tended to find jobs in HR, that sort of thing, that I again wasn't interested in. But they are useful. It's worth, just messaging a few of them, saying what's out there. On top of that, I was also trying to find out who was in charge of the departments that the jobs were in and being advertised for. So for example, if there's a particular marketing department in a company, I would try and find out who the head of that marketing department was, and I would just message them directly, either on LinkedIn or if I could find their email. So it's a lot of work, but when you are trying to find a job across the world, it really is about networking and staying on top of things. I also want to point out that even though I can speak intermediate Mandarin, it's just not at all at a level that I can have that as my working language. So it really cut out a lot of jobs that were in local companies which required Mandarin speakers. So anything that said Mandarin fluency, I just couldn't apply for it. So yeah, I looked for jobs where it said, Mandarin or a local language preferred, and a lot of the time that basically just means that you'll be working in English, and if you speak any of the local language, it's a bonus. It helps you along sometimes, but it's not necessary. Okay, the next question was, is the paperwork to go to Hong Kong difficult? And I would say yes, it's really difficult. I think that that's not just a Hong Kong specific thing. I think you would find the same difficulties for going to a lot of countries. So I know my friends who are now living in Korea, or friends who wanted to move to Taiwan, they all struggled with the paperwork of getting to whatever country they went to. So I'm just going to talk you through the the paperwork and getting a visa and getting to Hong Kong process. So I applied for my current job last year. It's been a year since I first applied for my job, and I think a lot of that comes down to COVID postponing things, but it still took months to be able to go from being offered my job to being able to get to Hong Kong. How it worked with my company was that they were sponsoring my visa, and I think if you want to find a job in Hong Kong or in China as a foreigner, you definitely need to find a company that sponsors your visa. And once they offered me the job, they kickstarted the process of getting the paperwork sorted. My company in particular had a visa agent that they had contracted to help me out with this process, which streamlined it so much. So this visa agent would just kind of message me a list of paperwork that she required and documents and forms that I needed to sign, and I would just provide it to her, and then she would send it off to the immigration department. So this is what I needed to provide for her. I needed to first of all sign and send her copies of my contract with my company. Then I needed to sign and send her a letter of authorization that allowed her to act on my behalf as my visa consultant. Then I needed to send her my CV and verification letters for every job that I did on my CV, which went back almost 10 years. I was emailing people from like 4 jobs ago being like, hi, I know it's been a really long time since we've spoken, but I need a favor. On top of that, I had to provide certificates and diplomas for every academic institution that I had studied in. Anything that I had got a certificate for, whether it was a language exam or my high school certificate, I had to get scanned copies of the original certificates, and again, they had to all be signed on headed paper, stamped, watermarked, whatever it was, to make it the most official it could be. That wasn't it. I was also sent a big questionnaire document that I had to fill out and sign. This was the application for entry for employment as professionals in Hong Kong certificate. And of course, you need to verify everything you put into that certificate. So I also had to send copies of my passport, and I had to email them a passport photo that needed to be attached to that document. Was that everything? I started the application process for my visa mid-June, and I didn't get my visa until mid-October? I don't know why. This was a big part of why my whole arrival date to Hong Kong was delayed by 3 months. Around beginning of August, I had sent off all of my documents. I thought I was in the clear and I was coasting along to start in September. And then halfway through August, I got another call from my visa consultant saying, hey, we need extra documentation specifying exactly what you did in these jobs. And it was my last job that I had in London and the one prior to that. And in addition to that, I then had to send them a letter explaining why my skills directly related to the job that I had been offered, so that they could essentially verify that they couldn't employ anyone locally for that job. In this case, I have to say that it was so useful to have my visa consultant, because she really went back and forth with me, drafting the letter, giving me a template and a structure for it, saying what would and wouldn't work. I think if you're on your own and you don't have a visa consultant like I did, I would recommend just trying to find examples of those letters, or seeing if there are Facebook groups where people have had to go through a similar process and if they can give you any advice. So yeah, that was the paperwork of getting me to Hong Kong. The next couple of questions were about traveling to China, specifically because of COVID. So one person asked, is it easy to get into China because of COVID? And another person asked, are the borders open again? I'm asking because I don't have a visa yet. COVID has made things so much harder than they needed to be. Now, I don't know about mainland China exactly, but I think it's even more rigorous than Hong Kong. So for Hong Kong, the borders are not open at the moment unless you are coming back as a student for a long-term study, or you have been employed as a professional, or I think if you're an essential services person like air crew, that sort of thing. You're not allowed in as a tourist, you're not allowed in as a short-term studies student. It's very rigorous to get into Hong Kong right now. Even if you have the right to come into Hong Kong and you've got a visa, there are so many restrictions in place. And it really depends on which country you're coming from, but for the majority of Western countries, or anywhere really abroad outside the region, you have to quarantine for 21 days in a quarantine hotel in Hong Kong. Now, even before I left the UK, while I was still at the airport in London, I had to provide a million documents to the airline to be allowed to fly. Thankfully, I flew with Cathay Pacific and they had a really useful checklist that I could just follow. So I had to provide my passport, obviously, and my pink visa, my pink Hong Kong visa, which just allows me to travel to Hong Kong. I then had to complete and print out a Cathay passenger travel declaration form, which just listed which countries I had traveled to in the last month or so. I then had to provide a negative COVID PCR test. It couldn't be a lateral flow test, and that needed to be done within 72 hours of my trip. I know if you fly within Europe, a lot of countries will accept a rapid lateral flow test, but not Hong Kong. No, no, no. I then had to give proof of accreditation that the company that provided my PCR test in London was accredited by the government and authorized to provide PCR tests for traveling. I had never heard of accreditation for COVID testing companies, so I really didn't know where to look for that. Turns out that you can go to UCAS in the UK, which just stands for United Kingdom Accreditation Service. I also had to provide Cathay with a hotel quarantine reservation confirmation so that they knew that I had somewhere to quarantine when I got to Hong Kong. Now going back to whether it was easy to get into Hong Kong. Still, after all of that documentation, no it wasn't. I arrived in Hong Kong airport at about 7 AM after a 12-hour flight, and I didn't leave Hong Kong airport until about 2 PM because of all of the checks that I had to go through before I could leave the airport. Hong Kong airport terminal at the moment is dead. I mean, there's no one traveling into Hong Kong. The whole terminal is pretty much empty and has been converted into one big COVID testing, paperwork processing factory. You start at one end and you kind of work your way through 1,000,001 checks. They had to check my PLF form and the QR code that I had associated with that. I had to sit down with somebody at some point and provide all of my visa and documents again so that they could check it and then give me a number that went around my neck, and that would be my passenger number for all the other checks and stuff that I had to go through. I had my paperwork checked by, I don't know, maybe 5-6 people at different points. At one point I was standing at a desk with a woman who was checking my phone number so that if they needed to contact me, they could contact me through WhatsApp. And then at the end of all that, they ushered me to my COVID PCR test, the first of many while I've been here. I just went into a booth as normal. They shoved something up my nose and in the back of my mouth, and then I got taken to a seating area that was sort of exam style seats where I waited for 3 hours for my COVID results. Eventually though, someone came around, let us all go. We were all ushered through the suitcase area to collect our luggage. Once we did that, I thought I was in the clear, I could get out of the airport. No, no, no. We had to then go to another desk at the arrivals terminal. Once they checked what quarantine hotel I was in, they then gave me a number. They put that number on all of my suitcases and they made me wait in a queue. Everybody was in different queues, and essentially what it was they were funneling people off onto different minibuses that would then drive people around directly to their hotels and drop them off. Eventually my queue was allowed to exit the airport, and as soon as I was outside of the airport, somebody came and sprayed with disinfectant all of my luggage, and eventually I found myself on my minibus with my luggage kind of shoved into the minibus somehow, and I was taken to my quarantine hotel. Everything in the hotel is covered in plastic. The whole reception is covered in plastic. The sconces, the light sconces in the hallway are covered in plastic. My bed was covered in plastic. It was freaking weird. And this is where I've been for the last 16 days. It's not easy to find a quarantine hotel in Hong Kong. There are only about 100 or so authorized hotels for quarantine, and they're all fully booked for like months in advance. And this is partly why my trip to Hong Kong was again so delayed, because even though I had my visa in October, I wasn't able to travel until mid-December to Hong Kong because my company just couldn't book a hotel room earlier than that. A couple of people asked how expensive my quarantine hotel was. I was really lucky that my company sponsored it, so they're paying for the hotel. So it's hard for me to say exactly how much it costs because I didn't book it. I tried to check online, but because it's fully booked, I can't actually see the price specifically for this hotel. But from what I can tell, quarantine hotels in Hong Kong tend to be in the price range of around 30 to 40 pounds a night. So what is that? Let me do my maths because I'm really bad. Which means for 21 days, it's around 630 to 840 pounds for the 21 days. But again, it really depends on what hotel you book. There are much nicer hotels than this one. There are also way worse ones. So I also want to note that since I moved to Hong Kong around the 10th of December, the COVID situation globally has worsened with Omicron, especially in the UK where cases are just skyrocketing. So since I left, Hong Kong imposed even stricter restrictions on travellers from the UK, travellers from the US, places which are doing particularly badly in terms of their numbers. Now travellers coming from the US or from the UK have to do their first week of quarantine in Penny's Bay quarantine facility, which, I don't know how to describe this. It is a quarantine facility that looks like a prison, for want of a better word. But anyway, the point is that it's getting stricter, not easier to travel to Hong Kong. And I think as long as the COVID situation across the world doesn't improve, that will remain the case, which kind of sucks because I'm not able to go back then to see my family. A lot of you asked about life in Hong Kong, so let's talk about that. First question was, have you been to Hong Kong prior to moving there? And if so, what did you like about it? I have never been to Hong Kong before, so this is really exciting for me. I was looking at a number of countries when I was trying to job search in Asia, but Hong Kong was always the number one that I wanted to go to. What pushed me to Hong Kong over other countries and other cities in Asia was the diversity, I guess, of life here. So there is something for everyone in Hong Kong, from, again, what I've been told, because I have not gone out and explored on my own. But it is a big metropolitan city, it's a global center, there are things to do, it is not a quiet place, and I have lived in London for the last 5 years and I thrive off that big city energy. But at the same time, there is so much nature in Hong Kong. It's so easy to just go out to the islands, or to go hiking up the peak, or go find nature if you need it and get out of the city. It is so convenient, and there is so much diversity in the options for what you want to do. There are beaches, there are mountains, there are forests, there is something for everyone. And that is something that I didn't have in London. It was so hard to get from central London to outside of London. You would have to travel for like an hour or two to get out of London. That's not the case in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is so much more dense, but that means that at the same time travel times are reduced. So yeah. I've also been told that the food is amazing. There's also a great expat community here, and although I don't want to kind of end up in this weird expat bubble where I don't have local friends, I liked the idea of a city being Western friendly. I think that's partly because I don't speak Cantonese, but it also meant that Hong Kongers themselves, their mindset were just a lot more friendly to my culture and my background. So even, for example, with Christmas, Hong Kong celebrates Christmas. You get 2 days of annual leave, which you don't in China. I would like my 2 days of annual leave for my Christmas. So it's just things like that that make life here in Hong Kong a bit easier for expats. Having said that, I am absolutely against not integrating with the local culture, not meeting Hong Kongers themselves. So I have already signed up for Cantonese classes to take as soon as I get out of quarantine. I'm lucky that my company is sort of a 60-40 split between Hong Kongers and Westerners, 40% being Westerners. It would mean that I would be able to have a healthy balance between what I'm used to and something exciting and new. Another question that somebody asked was, are there good universities in Hong Kong, and what are the most beautiful places there? Yeah, Hong Kong is a university hub, honestly. Compared to a lot of other parts of Asia, there are so many universities here in Hong Kong. There is Hong Kong University, there is the Chinese University of Hong Kong, there is Hong Kong Baptist University, Hong Kong Polytechnic University, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. There are so many universities here. Those are just the 5 that I can think of off the top of my head. It is really a sort of educational hub, so if you want to come to Hong Kong for studies or for a master's program or even just like a short-term language course, maybe not now during COVID, but there are options for you. In terms of beautiful places to see in Hong Kong, oh my gosh, so many. Again, I've not been to these, but I have been writing a list of places that I want to visit, particularly when I get out. There is the Dragon's Back Walk, which is just this big walk across the hills and mountains of Hong Kong. That's the natural infinity pool in Lantau Island. There is the Jade Market that I really want to go to. There is Shek O Beach, I think that's how you pronounce it, which looks beautiful. People have told me that there are 24-hour bookshops here in Hong Kong, which are just open 24 hours, so you could go to the bookshop at like 3 a.m. which sounds incredible. There is a lot of exciting things that I've got to see, and I can't wait till I'm out, but yeah, a few more days. Okay, I've been talking for a while, but there is one last question that I want to end on, which I think is such a good question, which is, show us 5 essential items to take to Asia. I'm really excited about this question because there's a lot of stuff that I thought about and brought with me in preparation for quarantine that I hope would be useful for anybody also going through quarantine, or just, you know, spending a long time away from home in a completely different culture. Okay, so there's no order to this, and it's very random, but these are things that have helped me through quarantine. Number 1 was books. Now, I've not done an awful lot of reading through quarantine, less than I would have liked, and they obviously take up a lot of luggage allowance and a lot of luggage space, but they have been such an escape for me. And also, even though I've not done as much reading as I would have liked, I've kind of created a little bookshelf station in my quarantine hotel room, and it has just made this space feel so much more like my own and cozy. And I know that it will do the same for my new room wherever I end up, just to have some books that I like and will read eventually lined up, and it personalizes the space, I think, a lot. The other thing, and I think this is probably my number 1 thing that I would suggest bringing with you if you're going into quarantine, is tea and coffee. I don't know if this is the most English thing I've done since I left the UK. That is because even though I've got a kettle in my quarantine room, my quarantine hotel is not that nice, so they didn't provide coffee or tea or anything like that. And if you're English, you will understand the necessity for tea. If you're American, hopefully you understand the necessity for coffee. But I could not survive without those two, even for like 2 days. Number 3 was colored paper, which sounds freaking weird, but I spent Christmas in quarantine, and I knew that my room was not going to have a Christmas tree, it was not going to be cute and decorated, and it was not going to feel Christmassy. So I packed a whole bunch of colored paper that I'd found in my old childhood room since childhood, and I spent New Year's Eve on the origami section of YouTube creating Christmas decorations from my room with my colored paper. And honestly, it was great. It was a fun way of spending my time that wasn't just, again, sitting and watching Netflix in front of my computer, and it just made my room feel so Christmassy and so cute, and I love it. It doesn't necessarily have to be colored paper, but just think of what you would want to decorate your room with. And if it's something that's paper, then it's lighter. Along the same lines, my friend gave me this for my leaving present. It's a foldable, portable photo frame, and I can now put that up in my room and have my friends and family in that photo frame. It's all just about personalizing an unfamiliar place. I'm gonna count that as number 3 as well, because it's along the same lines. Number 4 is bananagrams. It doesn't have to be bananagrams, it can be a card game or any game, but I brought bananagrams, which is kind of like Scrabble if you're unfamiliar with it, because it's something that I knew I would be able to play with my family at Christmas via FaceTime, which is what we did. You don't need to have the same board for this game, and it was just really nice and a fun way of being able to partake in festive activities remotely. And then lastly, and this is very specific to me, but I think should be specific to everyone, was I packed myself a little DIY kit. Which, if you don't know me, I am obsessed with DIY. I love it. I love being able to create things. I love being able to build things. I love being able to build useful things. And I packed myself a little bag of portable DIY items that I thought might be useful in Hong Kong for me. So it includes my sewing kit that I've got. I think that it's always useful to have a sewing kit. It included buttons, my Swiss Army knife, which I will always swear by, some door knobs. I thought if I get an item of furniture in Hong Kong and I don't like the knobs, again, I can personalize it with some door knobs. And also really useful, some command strips for if I want to hang, again, anything up in my room, like a photo frame, I can hang it up with my command strips. I would say the common theme to all of these is that they're all items that I could use to personalize my room, my quarantine hotel room, and then ultimately the room that I end up with an apartment. Hong Kong is such a new, big jump for me. I've never been here. I am so far out of my depth. I don't know very many people here, and having that sense of a familiar place that I can come home to at the end of the day, I think that will go a long way to making me feel more comfortable in Hong Kong and make me feel less homesick. And yeah, so if you're thinking about what to pack, obviously think about the essentials like clothes and documents, all that sort of thing, but also think about things that you can pack that might seem silly, like tea, but will go a long way to bringing you some comfort in a whole new country. Okay, those are the 5 things that I brought. those I think cover all the questions or question areas that you guys asked me about. I will be doing more videos about Hong Kong, obviously my vlogs, but on top of that, things like apartment hunting, setting up my life in Hong Kong, that sort of thing. So stay tuned for those, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!